Let's overcome and get through. All right. Couple firsts. Ugh, try English. Happy Veterans Day. Do we have any veterans in class? What about immediate family serve in the military? Absolutely. So give them my thanks for their service and Happy Veterans Day to all. The second thing I want to talk about is Hunter Sims is offering tutoring. Hunter is on the football team, but he also made one of the top grades in 310. And so he's just kind of looking, he's in graduate school. So he's in graduate studies, and he was just looking to help and make a little side money for those of you that need it. I know Sarah does it too, but her schedule is kind of fixed. So this would be in case somebody, on your time, on your schedule, if you wanted to kind of get ahead of the material. So I sent out an email to everybody that has his contact. And I think on there, he said something about a group, if you get groups of people, it can be less, but that's also available for anybody that needs it. Okay. All right. Let's get into the heart of the matter. In Unit 2, we talked about pelvic girdle rotations and did the pelvis spin? And then secondary to that, what spun it? Where did the motion come from? So the pelvic girdle rotation was in itself motion spin of the pelvis, but it can't happen without some other joint being responsible for spinning the ball. Like I use the analogy, if I was on a merry-go-round and the merry-go-round was just spinning, pay no attention to my hips. If I was to spin around, I wouldn't have transverse pelvic girdle rotation because everything about me is also spinning around. That's like me saying, the earth is rotating, therefore I have right lateral. So, that it has to be relative to the pelvis and the joints above and below. So if we follow that same concept, when we get into our isometric scenarios of identifying agonists, who are the agonists? The superhero muscles that we call to do a job, the muscles that are working above rest, the muscles that we turn on because there is a job for them to do. When we look at pelvic girdle rotations, we have to remember what was the joint, and now who are the muscles at that joint. So in other words, we don't have pelvic girdle rotators singularly. We have hip muscles that can do pelvic girdle rotation. We have trunk muscles that can do pelvic girdle rotation. It's a very similar concept. The pelvic girdle rotation is just the spin of the pelvis, but it can happen because of trunk motion or trunk muscles or hip motion and hip muscles. Does that make sense? So as this example that we've seen many, many, many times, what is gravity trying to do to my pelvis? It's trying to anteriorly rotate my pelvis, but it's also trying to flex my left hip, right? Gravity's trying to flex my left hip. So I would need my left hip extensors doing the job to keep me in this position while gravity's trying to flex me. So in essence, the left hip extensors are preventing left hip flexion, but also preventing anterior pelvic girdle rotation. Does that make sense? We have to bring it back to the joints that are actually responsible for spins. Any question before I get to the... Sure. We know that from here to there is anterior pelvic girdle rotation. But on our second test, we had a follow-up question. What was responsible for the pelvic girdle rotation? In this case, the anterior pelvic girdle rotation was because of my left hip undergoing flexion. Okay? The dumbbells and all of your mats are trying to flexion. There's more stuff on this side of the teeter-totter than on this side. So your muscles have to compensate by pulling on the back part of the teeter-totter to make sure you don't fall over, right? So gravity through the mass on this side of my leg is trying to flex my left hip. It's trying to anteriorly rotate me more. if I'm going to hold this position, I need my left hip extensors, those muscles that pull in the direction of extension, right? So, you know, like when you go down, the only way you're coming back up is that you posterior muscle pulling your pelvis down so that the front part of you can go up. It's the first class lever stuff. We'll get into that mechanics. But the point is that I need hip muscles to prevent pelvic girdle rotation. I need hip muscles to prevent hip motion. But we establish in Unit 2, hip motion can be responsible for pelvic girdle rotation. When our feet are off the ground, trunk motion can be responsible for pelvic girdle rotation. So before we went to the trunk, I wanted to establish one that I thought would be kind of easier to see, and that's left hip muscles preventing left hip motion and pelvic girdle rotation. Cool? Okay. Now let's go to alpha level 7. It follows the same rules though, guys. I know this is going to be, that's why we practice. This might be a little intimidating at first. That's why we practice. Don't pay any attention to the arrows. I just need to find a picture. Okay. So he's holding this position. Feet are off the ground. So hips aren't responsible for the pelvic girdle rotation. Hands are anchored. Now that's our feet. Our upper extremity is fixed. Gravity is trying to do this. And yes, it's trying to do this to the legs, but guess what? The legs are attached to the pelvis, so it's trying to rotate the pelvis. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to let you think about it for a second, but remember the cap and bottle concept. Okay. We call this right transverse because this is what usually happens. Usually we open the bottle by moving the cap. But we can open the bottle by moving the bottle about the cap, right? So we established that this is the same type of trunk rotation as this. Cool? Right, you can do that in your chair. Right transverse pelvic means left transverse trunk. Left transverse pelvic means right transverse trunk. Remember that? Okay. So when we're asking ourselves, when we're trying to identify agonists, it's okay to say, what is gravity trying to do to the pelvis? But remember that pelvis is influenced by the trunk. So what would gravity be trying to do to the trunk is really the question we want to ask, because now we could say, well, there's trunk muscles, muscles that influence trunk motion. So even though gravity is trying to spin the pelvis, in this scenario, it's also trying to spin the trunk. We have agonistic muscles that influence trunk motion. We do not have agonistic muscles that influence pelvic girdle rotation. I know that sounds weird. I'll try to clarify. We have agonistic muscles at the trunk joints and the hip joints that can spin the basketball, but we can't say pelvic girdle rotators because it could be because of just my right hip muscles. It could be just because of my left hip muscles. It could be because of a combination of both. It could be just, in other words, if you say pelvic girdle rotators, that could be any combination of different muscles. But if I say elbow flexors, it's the same muscle. If I say shoulder abductors, it's the same muscle. If I say ankle plantar flexors, it's the same muscles. So we can't say pelvic girdle rotators because that could be right hip, both hips, trunk. But we can say, well, what is moving the pelvic girdle? Then we identify whether it's the trunk, the right hip, the left hip, both hips, and then we can isolate those groups at those joints. That make sense? Okay. So the question is, holding this position, you know darn well it's working something in your core. There's some ab stuff happening. I'm trying to develop my students to go beyond core. I'm trying to develop my students to be able to say, no, I know exactly which muscles I need to pull with. Even though it may not be obvious, I've paid my tuition and invested in my education to be taught the tools to be able to figure it out. Okay, so give that some thought now that I'm hopefully assess the question specifically. Give it some thought. Always feel free to share with your neighbor. See if you're on the same page. If you're not, that's great education. Why do you think this? Why do you think that? So which muscle group, agonistic group at the trunk would be preventing these legs from falling down? Give it some thought. I tried to make it obvious, but I didn't say it. This is a transverse question, right? We're not talking about anterior, posterior. We're not talking about right, left, loud. This is a transverse question. If it helps you eliminate, like I do, if it helps you, in other words, once you establish what is the external force trying to do to my pelvis, thus trying to do to my trunk, say, well, who do I not need? I mean, that's how I do it. That's how I see it. Who can I eliminate? I already have gravity trying to do something, and if I'm keeping it in that position, obviously I need something pulling in the opposite direction. Because if I had something pulling in the same direction as gravity, you'd sling it down, right? Right? Gravity is trying to spin your pelvis to the right. Thus, it's trying to spin your trunk to your left. Gravity is trying to cause left transverse trunk rotation. Does that make sense? Gravity is trying to make your sternum look more to your left hip. It's another way to look at it. If gravity is trying to twist your trunk to your left, you do not need muscles that are also trying to twist your trunk to your left. Does that make sense? If gravity is trying to twist your trunk to your left, you need muscles that are trying to twist your trunk to the right. We have a name for those muscles. Right transverse trunk rotators. Right transverse trunk rotation pullers. Who are those muscles? I'll teach them to you in 415. Left external, right internal, right erector. But for now, we need to see them as directions of pull so that we can better understand how they work. Does that make sense? Think of it like this. If I was going to attach a rope to the legs to help prevent it to go in this way, wouldn't I want the rope to have an obliquity pulling like this? There's your left external, there's your right internal, and your left external and your right internal are right transverse pullers. Because you need right transverse pullers to prevent left transverse rotation. These are the easy ones. So what I mean by that is that once we start getting motion, then we have new variables. Was it eccentric? Was it concentric? And not only that, we can reverse the external force. On this side, gravity is trying to drop your legs here. But if you go up and twist over, now it's trying to do this. So you actually switch the agonist. So before I move on, do we have any questions why, walking down our process, we got to right transverse trunk rotation pullers? Because remember, if this was moving, it would make a heck of a lot more sense. This is fixed, this is moving. External force is trying to bring me here, so I need muscles that pull there. Problem is, this is now fixed, and this is out. So they switch function, and it's messing, it can mess with your brain. That's why we need a process.
How, I know there's documentation because obviously it's shown, but what have we also some legs that was someone was that too?
Okay. The question, which is a great question. I'm good. I love your question, and I'm gonna do my best to answer it. And I'm gonna try to walk us down a path of proof. Okay, so the question was, wouldn't there be leg muscles? Okay. If this person kept this muscle fixed, first of all, they're probably splinting them together, probably using hip adductors to create a rigid link. It's a heck of a lot easier to carry my mom used to say when I was a kid, boy, you weigh like a sack of potatoes, meaning that when it's harder to lift things like sacks of rice and stuff. Things that are rigid, like blocks and weights, are easier to move because the center of mass isn't constantly shifting. That's why you hook your legs when you're doing things, or you try to create rigidity, because it's a heck of a lot easier to move rigid things. However, assuming that this person wasn't using their adductors to create rigidity here to make it easier to move, what if? Could this person independently move their left hip and not have pelvic girdle rotation? Let's use your swivel chair. Okay, feet off of the floor, and you see how you can swivel in your chair. Okay, could you move your hips and not move your pelvis? Yeah. So, in other words, you could flex and extend, you could abduct and adduct, and you could internally and externally rotate, and that pelvis doesn't have to go with you. Does that make sense? And that tells me until those trunk muscles do it, that's what shows me that it has to be inside here, because those feet are off the ground and you can independently move those hips however you want. What's that? And that's why we did. Love your question. That's why we did this one. Because the pelvic girdle rotation has nothing to do with the leg that's off the ground. The leg that's off the ground, you can do the alphabet in cursive. It's until the fixed leg says, "Ah, come back." Make sense? So this would just be. It's a great question, and it's a common question, and it's a common question because this is not easy stuff. And I'm so glad you asked it, because there's either a few people out there or a few people out here who had the same question. And until we ask these things, we can't develop it and move forward. Any other follow-ups before we move on to, let's see, how is it at this week? Good. All right, how about something like this? They have one of these in our weight room. So if you want to get some practice in, I want the personal trainers that work there to be like, you've worked that body part for 15 straight days. Yeah, try to get pelvic rotation because of trunk muscles. All right, you guys, what do we know? I'm trying to teach my students to look for clues, and human movement, we're all made of the same materials, normal functioning ranges of motion. My point is that you don't have to have played ice hockey to be able to analyze someone's movement with ice hockey. Right? The knees, I mean, does that make sense? Right? So we shouldn't have to say, well, I can't do this because I've never done this exercise before. There's clues. There's clues here. We could figure it out. First clue is that in this position, the stack of weights are not all together. That tells me the person had to move in order to split the weights. That also tells me if this person relaxes, something's going to happen. Does that make sense? In other words, if you were doing a chest press machine and you moved and the weight stack pulled apart, that tells me if I relax, something's going to happen. Gravity is trying to bring these plates back together. Okay? Now we do need, it's my own fault, but we do need a reference. We do need a start position before we analyze isometric. So here is the start position. How do I know it's the start position? Gravity did what it was supposed to do. What's cool about this machine is you can reassess where do you want to start, where do you want to finish. But make no mistake about it, this is a version of those windshield wiper exercises, except in the machine, we don't have to worry about on this side, gravity's trying to do this, and on this side, gravity's trying to do that. You can set the machine to where the machine is trying to make you do the whole range of motion. That's why this is advantageous. Negatives about machines, they take up space and they cost a lot of money. But they also have some benefit too, okay? So, what position is my trunk in my start? Is it twisted? Is my trunk twisted to the left or is my trunk twisted to the right? To the left. Good. From here, there's nothing trying to make me twist. You know, again, gravity has the weight stack there. So from here, I have to make this happen. Does that make sense? Now here's the question. It's all still isometric. We'll get into the concentric and eccentric. But now I think we can set up my question. Now that you know that this is where I started, and now that you know this is where I finished, now you can do the thought experiment. What would happen if I turned off all my trunk muscles? Bang! Back to here. Does that make sense? If I turned off all the muscles in my trunk, bang, I would go back to here. I know this is working my trunk because the handles up here is what fixes my upper extremities. Trunk exercise, working the trunk muscles. Traditionally, people that don't have the tools to figure things out just say core. It's working my core. That's like the person at the fitness place down the road that I will never name, but it rhymes with Fred's, said, you're working your forearm muscles. Did I tell you that story? That's okay. We need to be beyond the forearm muscles. We need to be beyond the core because there may be rehab, there may be exercises, there may be stretches, there may be reasons that where we have to specifically target certain right twisters or left twisters, right benders or left benders. So we have to know who we're targeting, who's working. We can't just play fast and loose, okay? Gravity, working on the plates through the machines. You guys, it's no different than our muscles working through our joints onto our bones. It's the same thing. Gravity is trying to do what to his trunk? Right here. Gravity is trying to bring you back to where you started, right? So what motion is that? Gravity is trying to twist your trunk to the left. Make sense? We could do a thought experiment. If I had a remote control that magically pressed play and turned off all of his muscles, bang, the weight stack would slam and left transverse trunk rotation would happen. Right transverse pelvic, but left transverse trunk. And it's the trunk that we're interested in because now we can talk muscles. Make sense? So who are the agonists holding you into this position isometrically? Well, if the machine is trying to twist your trunk to the left, you don't need muscles that are trying to twist your trunk to the left. If the machine is trying to twist your trunk to the left, you need muscles that are trying to twist your trunk to the right. And again, it's non-traditional. We're used to always think of trunk twisting muscles doing this, but trunk twisting muscles can also do that. And it messes with our brains. That's why we need to slow down and have a process. The illusion stuff. It's no different. We just, this concept and this concept, we're just moving down to this concept and this concept. Okay? Does everybody understand? We need right transverse trunk rotators to maintain this position. Who are the right transverse trunk rotators? I'll teach them to you. But if all I did was say, okay, guys, right here, I'm working my left external, right internal, right around. Why? How are you working those? So identifying the groups based off of how they pull help us to see, prove who we need because we understand why we need them. And then once we have a good grasp of that, then we can say who's on that team, who pulls that way. Here are the muscles that pull that way. Make sense? Any questions? All right. I know y'all ready to get into concentric and eccentric, right? Yeah. Muscles influence motion through contraction. A lot of this will be reviewed, but this is how I teach. I wanted to make sure it's so important that we see the agonist and we understand those definitions, what they mean before we can. So the problem with muscle action suggests motion from agonistic muscles can be responsible for multiple motions. Right? Again, isometric, there's no motion, but those muscles are doing a job. They're working isometric. And then obviously we talk about concentric and eccentric. This is the problem with traditional verbiage. Traditional verbiage in muscle function, the problem is that we're used to memorizing things that don't have different variables. So, you know, again, states and capitals, you know, or parishes and parish seats, you know, you just memorize it. And so it's a heck of a lot easier to just say, this muscle does supinates the forearm, and when it's supine, flexes the forearm. It's just so easy to just say this muscle does these motions. But by now we understand that, whoa, that's not, it can do that, but it can also be doing a job and there's no motion at all. And it could also be doing a job where there's motion in the opposite direction if it's working eccentrically. And it could also be doing a job by preventing hypermobility. That's one thing I emphasize in biomechanics. Muscles don't just influence motion, they keep bones from dislocating from other bones. When someone tears a ligament, usually if it's a non-contact, in other words, I've done it 1,000 times and all of a sudden my leg went boom, it's because muscles weren't doing a job they were supposed to. They were a little late. They didn't turn on. They were tired and exhausted, and when we're tired and exhausted, we make mistakes. So there's so much more than just this muscle does this. So what's a better way to look at what muscles do is function. Not action, but function. Function. What's the function of a muscle? and that is to pull in a specific direction of motion, which it does all the time. When you're at rest, those muscles pull in specific directions of motion. When it's working isometrically, they pull in a specific direction of motion. Working concentric, pull in the same direction of motion. Working eccentric, pull in the same direction of motion. So there's no exceptions. The function, the purpose of a muscle is to pull in a specific direction of motion. How many teams or groups? I've said this several times. We have as many groups as we have motions. We have inversion and eversion. I'm going to have inversion pullers and eversion pullers. Dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. I'm going to have dorsiflexion pullers, plantar flexion pullers. If muscles could pull and push, you would only need half of the muscles in your body. That's why you got to cover all your bases. Front, back, outside, inside. Spin this way, spin that way. They have to pull in every direction motion. All right, so consider the following. This is where I'm hopefully I've already introduced it to you, but now I'm trying to develop and get you to master it. Biceps breakout. We all know the bicep. In fact, in class, I was like, someone named me a skeletal muscle. Biceps. Superstar. Biceps like the Michael Jordan skeletal muscles. Everybody knows Michael Jordan. Biceps influences elbow flexion from left to right. From left to right, we're working the bicep. But we're working it through concentric contraction, shortening while trying to shorten, while resting tone. Okay? The biceps breakout also influences elbow extension from right to left through eccentric contraction. Wouldn't you still be working your biceps when you lower it down? It's the same muscles. You feel it in the same place. So again, we can't say bicep just does flexion, because we know darn well when we're going down, we're still working the same muscles and we have extension. Then in addition, if you just hold this position, you can't hold this all day, your biceps can start getting tired. So there's no motion, but yet you're still working the bicep. So the irony is your traditional textbooks. Now again, I'm not saying the textbooks are wrong. I'm just saying they don't give context. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying the bicep doesn't do flexion. It only does it when it's working concentric. That's all I'm saying. 2 out of 3 times, and that doesn't even include rest, there's not going to be flexion. So it's kind of ironic that a majority of the time when that muscle's doing a job, you will not see flexion. It's the ultimate irony to all this. Because think about it, isometric, there's no motion. And with eccentrics, you're going to have the opposite motion. So the way we have to look at this is, how does it pull? It's an elbow flexor, the biceps, because it pulls in the direction of elbow flexion. And when that muscle's doing that job of preventing extension, when I see flexion, it's going to be concentric. When I see extension, it's going to be eccentric. And when I see it preventing extension, it's going to be isometric. All right? Well, you may say, well, that's just for the bicep. It's just an exception to the rule. All right? Let's do this. And remember, a lot of it is about Pavlov, repetition. Biceps flexion, biceps flexion, biceps flexion. So when some of my students see flexion in this exercise, that's who they give it credit to, the bicep. So it's a double whammy of misinformation. Oh gosh, did I say that word? Sorry. Misunderstanding. Again, it's not that there's malice, it's just they don't understand. On the test, guys, I'm telling you, I'm going to ask this, and I'm telling you people are going to miss it. I'm telling you, I'm going to ask this, and I'm telling you someone's going to miss it. And I'm going to double down by saying, if you prove me wrong and everybody gets this question right, Santa Claus is going to come and sprinkle some bonus on everybody. Still waiting for that to happen. You remember last test, I said if everybody gets the scapula shoulder question right, I'll give bonus. Wasn't close. I'm telling you, I'm going to ask this question, and I'm going to say, what group was responsible for this flexion? And somebody's going to tell me the bicep. Somebody's going to tell me the flexors. And I'm telling you why they're going to say it. And it's not their fault. It's not your fault. It's all you've ever done up to this time is been taught states and capitals, states and capitals, states and capitals. You hear Louisiana, you say Baton Rouge. So if all you've ever done is say bicep flexion, bicep flexion, bicep flexion, it makes sense that when you see flexion, the Pavlovian part of your brain wants to spurt out bicep. That makes sense.
So the bicep would be isometric right on.
The bicep would be taking a nap.
So the tricep would throw it. So
That's the point. That's the point. So the bicep, and so remember guys, contraction isn't just about shortening and lengthening. It's shortening, lengthening, or staying the same, but it's doing a job. So I'm not saying the bicep doesn't shorten from here to here. But you know what else the bicep could shorten by doing? Are you in witness protection? Okay, good. All right, miss the elbow? Okay, relax, 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 relax. I know you're joking. Relax. Relax, 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 relax. Relax, relax. That muscle's off. I can flex and extend you. I'm doing the work. Your muscles aren't. And when I flex you, it shortens. And when I extend you, it lengthens. Is that muscle contracting? Because it's off. Yeah. You see? Now, if I say, don't let me push your hand away, don't let me push, now all of a sudden you feel it doing a job. And then I say, okay, shorten, 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 shorten. That's concentric. Don't let me push you away. Don't let me push. Now slowly, slowly, slowly. Same muscle, different motion, different contraction. That's eccentric. But it has nothing to do with the shortening or lengthening if you're not doing anything. Good. Awesome. One day someone's going to mess with me back. I'm going to say, are you in witness protection? I'll be like, yeah. I'll be like, that's what I thought. I was just checking. So to your point, which was a great point, and that's why I teach it the way I do. We have to establish who's doing the job here, who's working. Who do I need to recruit to do this exercise? And you got it right. You need your tricep, but you also need your anconeus muscle. So that's why we say, well, gravity's trying to flex me, right, with the dumbbell. I don't need my flexion pullers. Throw it down. I need my extension pullers. The tricep is one of those muscles, but again, it's not long. I need extension pullers. And when I'm holding it isometrically, those extension pullers are preventing flexion. But when I observe extension, those extension pullers are causing the extension through concentric contraction, doing what they're trying to do. And when I observe flexion, when my extensors do flexion, that's negative work. That's what's next. I'm going to teach you the process. Identify the agonist, who's working because we know why they're working. Then do unit 2. What motion do I observe? Here to here, I see flexion. Here to here, I see extension. Extension pullers do flexion eccentrically. Extension pullers do extension concentrically. Make sense? Contraction in my class will be proven. There's no guessing. You're going to know. But we don't need the biceps. That's why I said it's taking a nap. Makes sense? Like, just like when we're doing curls, we don't need the tricep. Take a break. But when I extend, the tricep shortening, and when I flex, the triceps lengthening, but it's not contracting. It's not doing a job. I told you I was going to come to life. Yeah.
and holding it in that position is isometric.
Yes, absolutely. But again, here's what's super cool. I think if we go into the books or the Googles and we say, what does the tricep do? All they're going to give me is this. They're going to say tricep extends the elbow. And I'm like, yeah, but it also allows my flexion to happen in this exercise. And it also keeps me in this position so I can take this awkward picture for the textbook. In other words, my tricep can turn on to do a job physiologically, and I don't have to have extension. That's what I'm trying to tell you. But if I do have extension and it's on, it's got to be concentrated, because that's physics. And that's what I love about this, is that it's an is, as my old major professor used to say. Physiology, it's always changing. When we thought it was 1 ATP, now we think it's 3 ATP. This is physics. It has to be eccentrics, because the only way something that's pulling up can allow something to go down is if it's being lengthened while still trying to shrink. Make sense? So again, on the test, I'm telling you it's coming. I'm giving you batting practice. And I'm hoping that you guys are like, it's coming. And I'm going to serve up that, I'm going to throw it as hard as I can, 70 miles an hour tops. And I want you guys to do this. I want you to flip your bat. I want you to walk like Ric Flair. I want you to take pride in knowing that you're prepared to not tell me that this is bison. Flexion. Flexion. But it was two different muscle groups because they had to do two different jobs. Make sense? And I know some of you, and that's great, some of you are like, well, is it kind of this common sense? Apparently, sometimes we get so caught up in the Pavlov stuff that common sense just, we don't see it coming. We don't. I know. Guys, I know sometimes when I'm playing around and I start listing all these muscles, I've been doing this for a long time. However, I have to do my process every time. Every time. Okay, I'm here. Here was external. Every time. What muscles am I working with? Okay, what's the exercise trying to do to you? All right, we established the agonist. Great. Now I know the muscles I need because why they need them, and I understand how they pull. Now I can look at motion and prove contraction. Every time. And the reason I have to do it every time is because this is some confusing stuff without a process. Thank you for that question and that feedback. That's very important. And I guarantee you other people had that question as well. Okay? So again, why do so many resources state that the action of a specific muscle is a specific motion? Because it's convenient to teach and easy to memorize. Why should we learn that muscles influence motion through the context of contraction? Because that's how it works. This is the truth. I'll give you another example of what I'm trying to tell you. All right? So, I'm going to have students, and when I tell you it's going to happen, guys, it's only because I got 20 years of experience of it happening. I'm going to have students that are going to tell me from here. Now, if you can't see the cables trying to lift the bar up, cool. The cable's trying to bring your hands up. I'm going to have students tell me that they're working like deltoid and shoulder muscles. And what's crazy is their bodies know better. You know better. You know that if you get in this exercise, you're not going to work pushing muscles, you're going to be working pulling muscles. But they get so caught up with the specific motion. They get so caught up. Well, isn't this a shoulder press movement? Make sense? When you're doing an exercise, guys, it's not just going to be a movement. There's going to be movements if you want to go again. If I want to flex my elbow, great. If I want to do it again, I have to extend in order to flex again. Copyright Brian J. Campbell, 2024. So it's about movements. Muscles do influence motion, but only through the context of contraction. We have to have those three elements in any conversation we have about muscles. So putting a bow on it. When you go into the weight room, most exercises, not ones that can swap what the external force is trying to do, most exercise, when you're in that exercise, you're working the same muscles. All I'm asking you to start paying attention to is the same external forces that are trying to move you in the same way, you're going to be working the same muscles. The variations in the movements, the changes in the motion, the difference in the motion isn't because of different muscles. It's because of those same muscles doing different contractions. And that, my friends, hopefully it covers the cost of your educations. Because there's so much applicability here. When you're in the clinic, when you're working with people doing rehab, guys, I'm telling you, I was in the clinic. There's going to be exercises where you just want to do isometrics. You just want to emphasize concentrics. You just want to emphasize eccentrics. You need to be able to know. You need to be able to figure out how to create those scenarios. Make sense? All right, you guys, you have a great day. Thank you for coming to my sermon.